I'd like to welcome you all to City Lights Booksellers and Publishers. We are thrilled to have Samuel Woolley with us here tonight, celebrating a very, very important new book. It's called The Reality Game: How the Next Wave of Technology Will Break the Truth. It is from our friends at Public Affairs Books. Dr. Woolley is a writer and researcher specializing in the study of AI, emergent technology, politics, persuasion, and social media. He is an assistant professor in the School of Journalism and program director for computational propaganda research at the Center for Media Engagement at the University of Texas at Austin. Professor Woolley founded and directed the Digital Intelligence Lab at the Institute for the Future, which is a 50-year-old think tank based in the heart of Silicon Valley. He also co-founded and directed the research team at the Computational Propaganda Project at Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford. He has written on political manipulation of technology for a variety of publications. These include Wired, The Atlantic Monthly, Vice, TechCrunch, The Guardian, and many, many others. His research has been featured in publications such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. He's also made appearances on The Today Show, 60 Minutes, and Frontline. His work has been presented to members of NATO, the US Congress, and the UK Parliament. It is such a great honor to have him here with us tonight doing this incredible and very important research. Please give him a warm welcome.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Sometimes when I hear my bio, I think it sounds kind of fake, you know? But it's been crazy. It's been a wild ride. This is the last talk on my tour, and I'm really happy to be ending it here in San Francisco, and specifically here at City Lights. Thank you to everyone here at the store for having me. I couldn't think of a better place to end this tour and to talk about really what is a book on democracy at the end of the day, and the ways in which we reimagine and rebuild democracy in the technological age. A lot of people assume when they talk to me about my work that I am a computer scientist, and it's actually not true. Nothing could be further from the truth. For a long time, I kind of thought that maybe I should, try to play the game and be like, yeah, I took a few classes in Python, I know a little bit about HTML, but at the end of the day, I'm the kind of person that studies what I study by talking to people. I'm an ethnographer. I spend time in places, I spend time with people, and I go deep. I go deep on subjects. And so for the better part of the last decade, I've been going deep on the subject of what I call computational propaganda. And it's just a fancy term for the ways in which automation and computer code, algorithms and things like that, get used to manipulate public opinion. What we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, in 2016, during the US election, during the Brexit referendum, in Myanmar with the massacre of the Rohingya, in India with recent problems caused arguably by WhatsApp that have led to offline violence. We've seen social media become used as a tool for manipulation, as a tool for disinformation. A lot has changed, right? In the early 2000s, we had a perspective that social media was going to be something that would be the savior of democracy in many ways. And that was best shown through Google's kind of talking phrase of "do no evil," and it was also showcased by a lot of the work that came out of the time talking about digital utopia and sort of cyber libertarianism. That's not where we are now, but we're not lost. Everything's not lost yet. And this book is not just a book about how screwed up everything is and how scary the world is. It's actually a book about solutions. Every single chapter in this book ends with solutions. The conclusion is a solutions-oriented chapter. And after spending nearly a decade working on this, I've realized that there are a lot of things we can do. And I'm going to end the talk today on those things. So first, let's talk about storytelling and what it means to be an ethnographer and someone who studies technology by talking to the people who make and build technology. Tonight, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to introduce you to 4 people, 4 places, and 4 ideas that I learned in the last several years. And these 4 people, places, and ideas have been instrumental in how I wrote this book and how I've been thinking about technology. The first person is named Phil, and Phil is my advisor. He's who the book is dedicated to. He was my PhD advisor. He's now the director of the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford. And Phil really took me under his wing when I came to do my PhD at the University of Washington in Seattle. Phil at the time had been studying the Arab Spring. He had been in Tunisia, in Tunis, studying the people who were using technology in attempts to communicate about democracy, to organize protests, to do all of these sorts of things. He had written a book with Oxford Press called The Digital Origins of Dictatorship and Democracy. And the discussion in this book was all about the ways in which the internet had played a role from the beginning of the internet going public in countries for both facilitating dictatorship and also facilitating democracy, for helping people to realize freedom, but also for helping people to realize control. And so Phil obviously was thinking about these kinds of things very early on. And I had just come from being a fellow on the Obama campaign in 2012. And I had become enthralled when I was working on the campaign with the way that they were making use of data. I was like blown away by how sophisticated the data campaign was. There was a lot of excitement about the community organizing aspects of the campaign and the personal storytelling aspects, but really none of that would have been anything without the connection to the amount of data that the Obama campaign had on independent or undecided voters. And so what they did was they married the data, the massive amounts of data and the massive amounts of work with personal stories and humanizing sort of the data in a way that was able to really reach people and with a resounding message of what was hope and things like that. When I met Phil, Phil taught me something really, really important. And it was something that I'd kind of known, but that really bears saying to all of you, which is that technology and politics today are inherently connected. You really can't have one without the other. And to some extent, if you think of technology just simply as tools, or if we think about media and the ways that media gets used to communicate with people or to people about information on behalf of others, then this has always been the case. But in today's world, technology and politics are very much intertwined. The campaigns that tend to do the best around the world these days are the campaigns that have the most technological savvy. Because the reality is, not to overuse the phrase on the front cover, but the reality is that if you have a lot of data, and if you can marry it to a sophisticated AI system, then you can do very, very hyper-specific individualized ad targeting or targeting to people and speak to them in a way that they'd like to be spoken to. That's what's being realized now. So Phil, in Seattle, at the University of Washington, taught me that people and technology are intertwined. The next person I want to introduce you to is a person named Andrew. I met Andrew in England when I had taken a job at the University of Oxford. What had ended up happening was that we'd gotten grant money to study computational propaganda in about 2013 from the National Science Foundation in the US, and then the European Research Council followed suit. And they wanted to know the ways in which Russia and other countries were using social media to try to influence public opinion in democracies. And so Phil got offered a job at Oxford, and he said, hey, do you want to come along to Oxford with me? I'm like, yeah, twist my arm. Like, of course I want to come to Oxford with you. So long story short, I ended up there. And one day I was at a conference, actually at LSE, and I was standing around, sort of didn't know anyone, was young, like kind of scared about it, still am. And this guy approaches me, and when you study propaganda, a lot of times conspiracy theorists want to talk to you. So like when random people approach me when they know who I am and I've given a talk, I'm always a little bit like, are we going to start talking about aliens or flat earth or anti-vaccine stuff? And am I going to have to like, carry on with you? The fact of the matter is I don't really know how to talk to you about that stuff. But Andrew actually said to me, hey, I actually make and build automated profiles on social media for the Labour Party in England. I was like, what? He said, yeah, like, I control several hundred or thousand accounts on Twitter. I do it on the behalf of the Labour Party. Like, they don't pay me to do it or anything, but I'm doing it because I'm like a member and I believe in it and stuff. And I said, wow, this is pretty crazy. Yeah, let's talk. And we got to talking and struck up a kind of an unlikely friendship. And he really taught me a lot about the ways in which people can use technology to amplify their voices online. A lot of what I talk about in this book is about social media bots, the use of campaigns built to look like people, profiles built to look like people on social media, but that actually aren't people. They're automated profiles. And one person can manage many, many, many accounts online. And you can use those accounts to drive up likes. You can use those accounts to retweet messages. You can also use them now with the evolution of machine learning and AI to talk to people in a more sophisticated fashion. And Andrew taught me that there's always, always a person behind the technology. The technology doesn't exist on its own. Social media firms, I think today, would have you believe that the algorithms are apolitical, that they don't have value, that they make decisions in a way that no one could have figured out or decided upon. But if you follow the work of people like Safia Noble or the work of Microsoft Research New England, who actually have something called Social Media Collective that does some fantastic open work, surprisingly being at Microsoft, on this, you'll know that the algorithms and software and technology always have human value in them. The people that build these things encode them with their own beliefs. For instance, if you train a machine learning tool, and what you have to do is you have to go through a process of tagging the data, and you have people do that. If all the people that tag the data are white men, then the algorithm may end up being racist, especially if it's prioritizing where bus lines should go in a certain neighborhood, hypothetically. That's something that we've actually seen, right? Suddenly the poorer neighborhoods or the neighborhoods of color stop getting bus lines. Where the bus goes, the places that need free passes for the bus end up not getting as much buses coming through. And that is an algorithm or a tool encoded with human values. Bots are the same thing. So when you build bots to amplify information, when you use social media in attempts to manipulate public opinion, when social media companies build algorithms that prioritize certain kinds of information, there's politics there. There are decisions that go into that process. If I had $1 for every time I'd heard a social media company, a representative of a social media company say, "We're not the arbiters of truth," I'd have $10,000, because they don't want you to think that they arbitrate truth. But I'm here to tell you today that that's not the case. Trending algorithms that prioritize certain kinds of information to people curate information. They prioritize the things that you see. For the longest time, and even today, organizations like Google, Facebook, Twitter have made decisions about how to prioritize news to people. Think about that. That matters. And this book is about that. And Andrew taught me that you always need to look at the person behind the tool. It's not enough for us just to do quantitative research, to download a ton of data and say we're going to do big data analysis. We also need to know about who's building what they're building, why they're building it, and who they're doing it for. You might think that it's, savvy political campaigns a lot of the time that are doing this work, but it turns out that when you dig down deep, you start finding shadowy PR firms and marketing organizations that actually say, I can build your social media profile and add 10,000 accounts in the next few weeks, and surprise, surprise, what they're using is fake profiles and fake information. And it's a whole weird world out there. The third person I want to introduce you to is a woman named Marina. And Marina was my boss at the Institute for the Future. And I met Marina the day or 2 days after Trump won the 2016 election. It was the first time I'd ever been out to Institute for the Future, and it's in Palo Alto, and they flew me out for a roundtable with a bunch of research scientists and a bunch of politicians from the State Department who were really concerned with the weaponization of AI. And at the time, AI hadn't been weaponized in the ways that a lot of people thought it had. There weren't smart AI bots out there talking to people and convincing them to change their mind about politics. It was more that AI that was used behind the algorithms had been more subtly manipulating public opinion. But Marina listened to all of the experts speak, and then very astutely, in her way, said at the end of the talk, this is all really a continuation of KGB tactics and Russian stuff. And Marina's Ukrainian. She grew up in Ukraine during this, in the former Soviet Union. And she said, maybe what we need to think about isn't that we don't need to think necessarily that this propaganda is new, because this propaganda is not new. The tactics aren't new. What things that we're seeing are actually continuations of things we've seen for a very long time. It's the technology and the way that the technology is being leveraged that's making this so much more potent. We see automation, we see anonymity, we see these things of the problems of scale, parallel computation, quantum computing. All of these issues are things that we need to be considering. But while we consider them, we also need to be considering the way that the people who are behind them are using them. So Marina taught me we need to look to history. We have to think about the way that propaganda has been used in the past, and we have to have a deep understanding of not just the way that propaganda is used, but also the terminology that we use to discuss this stuff. Because what we say matters. Right now, there's a sort of epidemic in this country of using the term fake news. And the term fake news has been weaponized by people that spread fake news. I challenge you from here on out, if you want to ask me what you can do as an individual not to be part of the problem, don't use the term fake news. Use the term misinformation, which means accidentally spread false information, or disinformation, which means purposefully spread false information. Or if you want to be really fancy, you could say malinformation, which just means bad, stupid stuff. Junk news. And so, you know, the terminology matters, history matters, and it's no surprise to me or to the researchers that have studied this stuff, people like Carolyn Jack at the University of California, San Diego, who wrote a great piece called The Lexicon of Lies, all about the ways we talk about propaganda. It's no surprise that the people who spread these lies are retaking on the own terminology and making the same exact arguments about when you point the finger at them and say, you're doing this, they say, no, you're doing this. That's exactly the playbook. The playbook isn't necessarily to change people's minds, it's to create confusion. It's to generate apathy. It's to make people mad and polarized. And that's something that we miss a lot of the time. We think that there's like sophistication in the sense that these bots are like coming and talking to us and making us suddenly become interested in owning a gun. That's not what the bots are doing. The bots are there to make you not want to vote, to not want to engage in democracy, to think that the system is broken so that you're so angry that you vote for someone that speaks to your anger rather than someone that actually has policies, right? So we've got to look to history. And Marina is absolutely right that this stuff comes out of the Soviet playbook. But one thing that you all should know is that the Russians aren't the only people that do computational propaganda. And in fact, I think the Russians benefit a lot from us thinking that they are the only people that do computational propaganda and from us talking about it all the time as if it's a thing that only happens from them. Computational propaganda and what we call information operations happen nearly in every country around the world these days. There's a great report from my old team at Oxford that suggests that during elections in over 70 or 80 countries, I'm not sure of the specific number, but around the ballpark there, this stuff has been weaponized by governments and by campaigns. So it also happens domestically. Domestic actors do this. In some senses, there's been a democratization of computational propaganda. Almost anyone can do it these days. And in fact, my next book, it's going to be coming out with Yale Press. It's more scholarly, so it'll probably be even more boring. But my next book is called Manufacturing Consensus, and it's a riff on Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent. And the idea behind the book is that we use these technologies to create the illusion of popularity for things. That the more you make something look popular, the more you make it seem like a viable idea. Okay, one more person. The last person, last place, and last idea. Last person is Kathleen. She's my boss now at the University of Austin. She was formerly at the New York Times. She was the dining editor. And before that, she was a sports reporter. I don't know how you make that transition. You'll have to ask Kathleen. But yeah, she's fantastic. And when I went to UT, I'd kind of lost a little bit of hope because of everything that's going on and because I'd been writing this damn book and like spending time thinking about the ways in which the informational system is broken. But I work at the School of Journalism at UT, and Kathleen's the director. And Kathleen has taught me that we need to place faith in the institutions that we already have. We don't need to create brand new things. We have the Federal Elections Commission, we have the Federal Communications Commission, we don't need the Federal Disinformation Commission. We don't need one more commission to do things in Washington. We need to invest in those. But more specifically, we need to invest in journalism. Journalism in this country has done amazing things. There's so many people that work for great publications around the United States that want to do good work and want to protect democracy, but they're still having to learn on the fly. And in fact, in the book, I talk a lot about the ways in which journalism has been not just challenged by the digital era. It's not like they're feckless individuals or organizations that can't handle the digital era. It's that organizations like Google, Google News, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter massively benefit off the work of journalists without giving any remuneration or money to these folks. The same can be said for organizations like Wikipedia. When YouTube faced the crisis of disinformation, what did it do? It started linking to Wikipedia articles, but they hadn't even talked to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a nonprofit, one of the 5 most accessed sites on the web, but a nonprofit, and YouTube was using it as the resource that YouTube sent people to when they thought something was disinformation. Same thing goes for journalists. Google News, for the longest time, gave snippets of articles. And when people started researching it, you couldn't click through to the actual article, but the Google News gave snippets. When you click the actual article, the research showed is that no one actually read the full article. No one actually clicked through. They just read the little piece. And so the journalists put all the work into doing this investigation, writing the whole article. Google posts the article, posts the snippet, and then no one actually reads it. And we wonder why the news industry is failing, why it's having a hard time. I mean, maybe not failing, maybe that's the wrong word. What I think is we can reinvigorate journalism. And I'm actually working on an op-ed right now, and not to let the cat out of the bag too much, but I'm going to tell you exactly what my argument is. The argument is that the technology firms around the country should have to put, I don't know, $10 billion or $20 billion into a public trust in the United States and let it be overseen by civil society groups, people that have a stake in making sure the money is spent wisely and well. Google News Labs has committed $350 million or so to the Google News Initiative. Google gives out that money. They make partnerships with organizations. They make decisions about who gets it and who doesn't. And for a long time, what Google's done when they've experienced backlash about their policies or their algorithms not prioritizing full articles, they've deprioritized the news sites that have complained. And so that's not good enough. The technology companies have helped create this problem, and they've admitted to it. There's been a big mea culpa moment. We all saw Mark Zuckerberg sitting before Congress sort of saying, shit, you know, I know that Cambridge Analytica did some bad stuff. We have a hand in that. That's kind of our fault. But they haven't really given back. They haven't really systematized the response to this problem. They've done some things, and they've been working hard in many ways, but it's not enough. It's really important that we remember these are multi-billion-dollar companies, some of the richest companies in the world. They get treated more like nation states these days than they get treated like a regular company. So Kathleen taught me to reinvest in journalism and to be skeptical of what we see today, and to not think, like I said earlier in my slip, that journalism's failed, to think that journalism, there's a lot there. With all these things in mind, all these things taken together, we have a really interesting picture, and we have this book. And this book is actually a book about the future. I spent a lot of time talking about what we've been through, but this book looks to the next wave of technology. This book is about deepfake videos. It's about AI. It's about virtual reality. It's about automated voice systems that sound just like a person, like Google Duplex or Google Assistant. And it thinks a lot about the ways in which this next wave of technologies will make for more potent artificial disinformation. And the subtitle is provocative for a reason. It's supposed to scare people. But in best case scenario, you'll prove me wrong. You will not let the next wave of technology break the truth. This is supposed to be a warning and a provocation. I'm going to do a little reading just for a few minutes, and then I'm going to end with some solutions, and we'll do a Q&A. Conclusion, designing with human rights in mind. Finding solutions to the problem posed by online disinformation and political manipulation is a daunting task. The disinformation landscape is vast, and it extends beyond our current ability to track it or contain it effectively. Moreover, the internet grows larger every day. According to a 2017 report, on the state of the net from the software firm Domo, which combined in-depth research from multiple companies and news outlets, we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every day. 2.5 quintillion, I don't even know what that number means. Moreover, the number of internet users grew by 1 billion to a total of 3.7 billion active users in the 5 years previous to that report. So from 2012 to 2017, the internet grew by 1 billion users. A 2018 Forbes article asserted that 90% of the online data available in the world was generated in the previous 2 years. Let me let that sink in. 90% of the online data available in the world was generated in the previous 2 years. This means that people working to game public opinion or exert social and political oppression using online tools have almost unimaginable amounts of data available on potential targets, with new information beaming out to them every millisecond. They also have access to a lot of potential targets and can leverage online anonymity, automation, and the sheer scale of the net to remain nearly untrackable. Important ethical and legal considerations, along with the near impossibility of finding a skillful operative, make prosecution a poor strategy for stamping out computational propaganda. Instead, we've got to fix the ecosystem. It's time to build, design, and redesign the next wave of technology with human rights at the forefront of our minds. Thinking about responses to the rising tide of computational propaganda, I find it helpful to break them down into responses for the short term, the medium term, and the long term. Because of the quixotic nature of technology today, I usually consider tool or technology-based responses to be the shortest term fixes of all. Many of these efforts are band-aid approaches focused on triaging help for the most egregious issues and oversights associated with infrastructure of Web 2.0, the internet of social media. Such amendments include little tweaks to social media news algorithms, or the code that identifies trends, or software patches to existing tools. They include ephemeral new applications for identifying junk news or browser plugins that track and catalog political advertisements. These efforts are useful as far as they go, but online manipulation tactics are constantly evolving. What works to track disinformation or bots on Twitter today may not be very useful a year from now. In fact, many of the applications that have been built for such purposes quickly become defunct owing to code-level changes made by the social media firms, a lack of funding or upkeep, or propaganda agents finding a simple way to game them. There are useful products of this kind, though, like BotCheck and SurfSafe from Robot Labs that detect computational propaganda on Twitter and check for fake news sites using one's browser. But these programs need to be constantly updated and translated to other platforms to stay relevant and to stay useful. They present a promising start for tools that alert users to the threats of disinformation, but they must be combined with action from technology firms, governments, news organizations, and others in order to really be truly effective. Another example of a propaganda tracker is the Hamilton 68 dashboard, a project from the Alliance for Securing Democracy at the German Marshall Fund, GMF, that was built to track alleged Russian Twitter accounts. Although it's important to identify and report nefarious or automated social media traffic, and equally important to notify users that they may be encountering false news reports, these efforts are too passive and too focused on user-based fixes to counter computational propaganda. Also, it's important to remember that a good deal of research shows that post hoc fact checks do not work, and that social media firms are engaged in a constant battle to catch and delete new and innovative types of bots, cyborg, and human-based information operations. More than anything, though, I want to communicate in this chapter that everything's not lost. Not only researchers, policymakers, and civil society groups around the world, but also the technology firms are fighting to stem the tide of digital propaganda. Employees at Facebook have managed to dismantle predatory and disinformative advertisements on topics from payday loans to which candidate should get a vote. Googlers have stood firm against shady dealings in military drone research and manufacturing. It's also clear to me that today's large tech firms have to get real with themselves. They are now media companies, purveyors of news, curators of information, and yes, arbiters of the truth. They owe a debt to both democracy and the free market, and their allegiance to the latter doesn't mean they can ignore the former. So, one of the things that you might not know, and you probably don't know, because why would you, is that the English version of the book is subtitled, How the Next Wave of Technology Will Break the Truth and What We Can Do About It. For some reason, it didn't make the American version due to editorial decisions, but I really like the What We Can Do About It. And so I'm going to tell you a few things. I talked about the short term, the medium term, and the long term. Now, in the short term, the best things that you can do as people are pretty simple. They are to read the whole article, and I'm not being facetious. I think that myself the other day caught myself like tweeting an article that I hadn't read the whole thing, and I'm like, what am I doing? Like why am I doing this? I study this. I should know better than this. One of my close friends who did a PhD with me at University of Washington, who is brilliant, got a message saying that I don't want to out them, had shared a known piece of Russian disinformation on Tumblr from the Internet Research Agency. And this is a person that studies this stuff, that knows it really, really well. If they can be fooled by it, if I can be fooled by it, then we all can be fooled by it. So we have to read the whole article, and we have to think very carefully before we share what we share. What we're seeing right now isn't the proliferation of cheap fakes during the 2020 or deep fakes during the 2020 election. It's not like sophisticated AI video that makes Donald Trump look like he's saying something that he's not saying. There's a whole chapter on this, and I think it's a potent weapon, and it's coming, and we'll start to see more of this. What we're seeing is regular people sharing videos that are edited on iMovie. Videos of Joe Biden that look like a racist because they're selectively edited. Videos of Nancy Pelosi that look like she's drunk. Videos of the Covington Catholic High School students that make it look like something completely different happened than what actually ended up happening. And also the video of Jim Acosta, the CNN reporter, that was sped up to make him look like he was abusing a White House intern in some way, shape, or form, that then got his press credentials revoked and then subsequently reinstated through some weird, strange episode of Mr. Magoo. And so you've got to be careful about what you share. We all have. The other thing that people can do is talk to the people that they love and the people that they care about. I just wrote a report for the National Endowment for Democracy in DC, and it's called The Demand for Disinformation. And the main takeaway I got from that report, I wrote it with my colleague Katie Joseph. In fact, she deserves the lion's share of the credit for the work. The big takeaway I had was that the only way people really change their minds when it comes to these kinds of issues and when it comes to the polarized nature of the United States at the moment and other countries is to talk to people that they care about and love. Because psychologically, you don't really change your mind based upon a conversation you have on Facebook. You don't change your mind based upon an argument that you have with someone that you don't know. It needs to be a conversation with someone that's civil, and it needs to be about a topic that you care about, and that needs to be conveyed. So those are short-term things. In the medium term, we need policy. We need regulation. I'm so sick of hearing from people that this is just a user issue and that self-regulation is going to solve this. We can't just let Google, Facebook, Twitter, and the powers that be make decisions internally about what they're going to do. What ends up happening when that's the case is that they say to researchers like me, hey, your research is flawed. It's not scientific. And I say, what do you mean it's flawed? What do you mean it's not scientific? And they say, well, you didn't have all the access to the data that we had. And you didn't have a representative sample in that quantitative analysis you did. And then I say, oh, well, maybe you could share with me a whole data set, and then I'll do the analysis. How about that? And they're like, yeah, we'll figure that out. And they have this thing called Social Science 1 that's supposed to do that, but it's not really happening. There's no real regulation that holds them accountable for what's going on their platforms. There's no oversight. In the early 2000s, the Federal Elections Commission made a decision that basically said that they weren't going to look at any political communication during elections online, full stop. They look at TV, they look at radio, they look at magazines. They make sure that campaigns aren't doing really illicit, messed up things in those areas, but online they don't look at all. And that's hugely problematic. The government has a huge role in this, and the government needs to do something. Currently, nothing will get done. There is policy that has been created that is waiting to go before a more, let's say, a less polarized Congress that I'm very sort of happy with, that I think is well informed. But right now there's not much appetite to it. However, we can look to other countries. We can look to other places throughout the world to figure out the ways in which they're dealing with this problem. Countries in Europe would be some of them, but also some countries in South America. And then there's a long-term fix. And in the book, the tagline is, we've got to design with democracy in mind. We've got to design with human rights in mind. Because my belief is that the platforms that we use today, and it's not much of a belief, it's just a fact, were designed for engagement. They were designed to get people to stay on them. They were designed to scale, to grow to massive sizes. We don't have to accept that. That's not something that we asked for. That's something that exists, that is now infrastructural in our society. Facebook is over 2 billion users. They were also designed to make money at the end of the day. And what happens when that's the case? I think we get what we have now. We've gotten what they built. And what they built was a system that did not prioritize high quality information or engagement or civility. They built systems that prioritize the opposite of those things. And so I have a belief that it's possible to actually create technology in the interest of democracy and human rights. And we see it with things like Mastodon or Mozilla to some extent. And we can see more of it. And with Jane McGonigal, who really guided me on this book, Jane's a game designer and the author of Reality is Broken. I co-created the Ethical OS with some funding from the Omidyar Network. And the Ethical OS, you can find it for free, ethicalos.org, is a tool that IFTF had a hand in, Institute for the Future had a hand in, that gives technologists a bunch of provocations about how to think about the problems that could happen with the technology that they're building as they're building it. So it's sort of a toolkit to like think through things. Introduction to Computer Science at Stanford has used it. We talked to Y Combinator about using it. We've talked to some other organizations about like the ways in which they could leverage it. And that's really exciting to me because that means that there's things that we can do and there's questions we can ask. Now, the long term is more of a challenge. And at the simplest level, we have to reinvest in critical thinking in public schools. We have to reinvest in media literacy in public schools. It's not enough, it's not fair that, it's not fair to expect that this is a user fix or a people-based problem, as we've been told, when the education institutions that we have in this country don't really give you critical thinking until you get to college, and a lot of us don't get there. It's time for us to create a robust system also of public interest technologists. In the 1950s, a bunch of foundations came together in the United States to create public interest law because it basically didn't exist then. You know, if you were poor, you couldn't get a lawyer. And you know, you might say to some extent that's true today, and I would say, yeah, you're right, but we've come a long way. And we need the same thing for technology. We can't always have the best and brightest going to Google and Facebook to make a ton of money because they think they're going to do something good, because they're sold that line. We need the best and brightest also going to nonprofits. We need them going to universities. We need people that understand technology to be helping build legislation. We need people that understand code to be helping build the legislation that informs how we litigate computational propaganda. While Dianne Feinstein, local hero, this bill called the Bot Accountability and Abuse Act that was put before Congress, or before the Senate a year or two ago, was laudable. It was also not feasible at all, because I don't think technologists had really looked at it, because the bill was written in such a way that it didn't understand that bots are infrastructural to the web. Over half of all internet traffic comes from automated accounts. And that problem wouldn't happen if we had public interest technologists. When we studied Germany around 2016 during their last election, or the election then, we thought we would find a lot of people sharing dis and misinformation, but we didn't. And we were wondering why the heck that was. We knew that the far right in Germany had gained a sort of foothold, had become very powerful. What we quickly realized was that Germany had a really robust public media system. Germany had a robust program for critical thinking in public schools. After World War II, with what Germany experienced with the Nazis, Germany made it illegal to talk about white supremacy and things in the public domain. We're very, very afraid in this country to think about things like hate speech because we are really concerned with free speech, rightfully so in some ways. But we can't always treat the First Amendment as if it's at odds with our right to safety and our right to security. We've got to figure out a better way. And in the introduction to this book, I begin with a quote from Betty Reed Soskin, who's from the Bay Area. She's in the East Bay. She's in her late 90s. She's a park ranger at the Rosie the Riveter Museum, and she's amazing. My wife took me to see her give a talk. I was kind of reluctant to go, and I found myself in tears at the end of the talk because she's one of the most inspirational speakers I've ever heard. It was so amazing. I highly recommend looking her up on YouTube. And she says this, and this is what I'm going to end you with, and then let you ask some questions. She says, "Every generation I know now has to recreate democracy in its time because democracy will never be fixed. It was not intended to. It's a participatory form of governance, and we all have the responsibility to form that more perfect union." Thank you. So now I think we can do some Q&A, and I'm happy to manage it. Don't be shy. Any questions, anyone? Yes?
Yeah, enjoyed the book. Interesting talk for sure. Kind of a comment and then a question. First off, I thought it was interesting how you brought in the emergence component. And to me, when you brought up the KGB, like active measures stuff from the 50s, we've seen this stuff before. These techniques we see online isn't new. But to me, when I think about emergence, I think about as you scale some of these things up, you get more than just the sum of the parts. And we do see kind of emergent effects of some of this stuff at scale that does render them, you know, kind of a new beast in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And kind of thinking about like the deepfake detection stuff, for a few more years we'll be able to do it for sure. 5 years, maybe 10 years, optimistically. But like ultimately, a lot of these techniques I feel like are asymmetric to the attacker, and I think that's like something really kind of important that kind of gets lost in some of the discussion about this.
Yeah.
And then the other question I wanted to ask about was what you brought up kind of in the book about a lot of this blame gets put onto the people that are building these solutions, which I agree with. I totally agree that it's, you know, techno-libertarian thinking when it comes to who's building these platforms and algorithms. But ultimately, to me, those systems are just answering to a CEO that answers to a board that answers to shareholders. Mm-hmm. And so to me, like really all of this is symptomatic of capitalism driving things at the base. And so I'm wondering, how do you see meaningful solutions existing in this kind of like incentive model?
Yeah, I think that, so on your first point well taken, and point on emergence, and I guess like to get into the heart of that, for everyone else, we see disinformation and computational propaganda campaigns launched at the public, and oftentimes what happens is they're disinformation when they begin. They are purposefully spread false information intended to manipulate, but they become misinformation very quickly. And so when I worked at Google Jigsaw as a fellow for a year, it was interesting, kind of an experience that really shook me. What they called it was seeding and fertilizing. And you just basically plant the seed, then you fertilize it, and then you let regular people do the work and spread the propaganda for you. And so it is difficult to track. There is this kind of problem where you can't figure out where the snake's mouth begins and the tail ends, you know, to use the Ouroboros as a, you know, metaphor. I think with the second question, so yes, this is a problem of capitalism in the free market. There's no way of getting around it. Like when you prioritize for profit, you prioritize systems that take advantage of people a lot of the time. And not to out myself, but my master's is in critical cultural studies, so I spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff. And I believe that serious changes have to be made, but I don't think we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, it's the best what we have right now. Maybe, you know, maybe not. It's the best bad system we have, but Betty Reed Soskin's quote gives me hope because it's this idea that democracy can look different in different generations. And I don't quite know what the answer is. I can't really answer your question. I wish I did have the answer because I'd, you know, I act like I didn't know anyone and probably just leave and live in a beautiful house. But you know, we can rebuild democracy in a different way that interacts with capitalism in a different way. And maybe we need to speak the language of the market. Recently, when I've been talking to people at Facebook and Google, what I've been saying is like, maybe it'll be good business for you to actually do something that's beneficial for society. Think about that, you know? Like, how do we market this as good business? Other questions? Anyone? All right. That's great. Short and sweet. That's by far the shortest and sweetest of all of them. So thank you. Thank you very much for having me. This was great.